So in the previous video, we uploaded all the author information from our data dump into Apache Cassandra. We did that by creating a Spring Boot project and parsing the file, the data dump that we got from Open Library API, and we created records for the author. So right now in our database, we basically have all of the authors in the world set up. All right, so here is my my Cassandra database. I'm going to use the key space main here, which is where I have the table, and I have one table right now. Okay, so that is select star from author by ID. Okay, so this is going to be a long table. It's going to go on forever, I guess. This basically has all the authors in the world. Okay, we've basically taken that whole data dump and pushed everything, or at least I did. You don't have to. So with this, we have just the author names in place. What we really need to upload is the book information, right? We want to get each book from the book dump and then create a row in the book table. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this video. In order to do that, it's pretty similar to what we did for author, but what we're going to do is also refer to this author table. Okay, so we talked about, like when we were designing the database schema, we talked about how you don't do joins in Cassandra, right? When you're uploading book information, the author information needs to be there in it. So what we're going to do is do the same thing as we did here for author. We're going to parse each book line by line. But then when we save a book, we don't save the author ID because that's what's there in the dump, right? We're gonna actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the author ID, fetch the author name from this table that we have created, and then insert the author name there. Okay, so that's how we are denormalizing the data so that fetching an individual book is gonna be super fast and super efficient. Okay, that's what we're gonna do in this video. So I'm going to switch to my code over here. So what I have here is init authors, which is doing all this work. I'm going to create the method init works here, right? So a post construct, it's going to do these two things. Okay, now how do I start init works? Well, the underlying concept is the same. I'm actually going to do path.get of the works dump location now instead of the author dump location, and I'm gonna change this to works dump location, and I'm basically going to do the same try with resources, and then I'm going to copy and paste the same catch. If something fails, I am just failing without really any handling, right? I'm just going to print something to the console and then fail, which is fine. Okay, now what do we need? We have lines.forEach. For every line that we have, we need to do an insert, right? So I'm going to copy this part because it's essentially the same, and this is where it differs, right? What we're doing over here is taking out all the stuff that is there in each line, which is not necessary. We're going to skip the initial part of it, right? And we are only going to look at the individual line from the first curly brace, which is basically what we need. Okay, so here is the part of the code which basically takes out all of the stuff in the line until the first curly brace is hit. And when that's hit, I'm going to create a new JSON object from what is left. So instead of the author object here, I'm going to create the book object. Okay, now what does this need to do? It needs to get the book information and put it into a new book instance, and then we're going to have to post it to the book repository, very similar to what we've done over here, right? I'm going to close this guy here. Okay, so we have author and author repository. We need something similar. We need book and book repository, and we need to have books by ID, because that's what we need, right? What we want is when somebody loads a page with a certain book ID, we need to show that book information. That's kind of why we are doing all this, right? So we need a book by ID table. So we are going to create a book by ID entity so that we can create that object and save it to the database. That's the goal. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to copy this and paste it. We're going to tweak it so that this works for book, because there is a lot of stuff which is very similar. All right, so instead of author copy, we're going to rename this to, okay, this is going to be book.java. Yes, refactor everything else. And then this is going to be book repository.java. It didn't ask me to refactor over here. All right, so I'm just going to make this book repository. And then this is going to be, and this one should be already renamed. So the fundamental structure of this entity is going to be the same, right? We have a book and we have an ID for that book. And I'm going to call this book ID. And of course, the name of the table is also going to be book by ID, all right? There is going to be one ID, which is going to be the primary key, and it is essentially the partition key. We want the book data to be partitioned based on the book ID. That's perfect. Now we have the book name. Let's actually see if this thing loaded. Okay, so this thing's loaded, so we can extract a couple of lines from here so we can examine what an individual book looks like. Okay, I'm gonna copy this and let's get rid of some of these stuff. Well, I actually had this here, I didn't even realize it. Okay, so here is the book data, right? So we're gonna get rid of all this stuff. So we're gonna start from over here. Okay. We're gonna start from here. I'm gonna copy this, create a new file, paste this here, and make this JSON so that we can really see what's going on, and then format the document. Okay. So what we have here is the title. We have the cover ID, all right? We don't have the image itself. We have the cover ID, which is fine. We can work with it. Here is the key. Just like for the author, we had to get the key and then remove /author/ in the front. For a book or a work, we have to get the key and remove /work/ from the front. The authors is going to be an array of essentially the author ID. Okay, so we need to get this guy out and then pull up the author name from the authors by ID table that we have here. This is something we can essentially ignore. Not too worried about subjects. I'll probably add the created and last modified, not too interested in that. I believe there are a few more with more details. There should be like a description over here. There are some which has description. There's a better way to figure out what are the properties that I need in this book entity. And the way to do that is by going to the documentation for the data source where we got this thing. Okay, so here is the Open Library data dump where it talks about what the JSON record format is going to be like. Okay, so here is the work record, which is what we are looking at. So the format is going to be like this. You have the title, you have the subtitle, we have the authors, which is the array of the author thing that we looked at. We have a bunch of other things here. There is description, which we're going to use. First sentence is super interesting. There is the first sentence of the book and the first published date. I'm going to use that as the published date for the book. Okay, so I'm going to get those properties, some key properties that I find interesting. I'm obviously not going to cover everything, right? It's not the purpose of this exercise to look at each and every element and then try and incorporate them. Well, that's not the point. I'm going to get the date, okay, the published date. I'm going to make this private. I'm going to make this a local date because it's a good format for storing date and you're not worried about time. I'm just going to make it local date and call this published date. And then this one is going to be a column in Cassandra. And I'm going to call this published date as well. And then this is going to be a Cassandra type. What type is it going to be? There is a date type. So I'm just going to use that. Type equals name dot date. All right. So there is a date type that I'm marking the published date with. Okay. Now I'm going to get rid of all this other stuff so that's not cluttered. So I have 3 properties here. One is the name, one is the description, and one is the published date. What other stuff do we find interesting? Well, we need to show the cover, of course, right? We have cover as an array. I think I saw that somewhere. Covers is an array of type int. The reason it's of type int is it's basically having the cover ID. Okay, so here is a book, here is a work. And if you look at the covers, you see this, it just has the cover ID, and cover is mapped to a certain API URL, right? So we're going to use the API URL for the cover. We're not going to get the cover dump, right? We don't have rolling monthly dumps is what they say. I don't want to bother with the cover dump. What I can do is use the cover API. So let me actually look that up next. So web API, covers API. I'm just going to use the Open Libraries cover API and not have to do that myself. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Here's the ID, and here is a sample cover image. So this is the small. I can change this to a M here, which brings a medium thumbnail, and I can make this large, hopefully, and I get a large thumbnail. Okay, so can I take this thumbnail ID, cover ID, and get the cover? All right, let's see. I'm going to change, oops, I'm going to change this guy here and see if I get the cover. All right, here it is. So this is a cover for this random book that I picked up. Okay, so this works. So the goal is I'm going to basically save the cover ID and not save the image itself. When the book page is loading, I'm going to add an image tag with the URL that I construct from this thing. A medium URL is probably, the medium size image is probably going to do. So I'm going to just take this URL and then create that on the page. So no saving cover, but I do need to save the cover IDs themselves. All right, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to get it's going to be a list of string integer. I'm just going to make it string so that I don't have to mess with possible formatting issues. I'm going to make this private. It's a list of string, all the cover IDs, okay? Cover IDs. And this is going to be at column cover IDs. This is not necessary. Well, why am I doing the underscore? It's just maybe a convention, but Cassandra should automatically figure out what the column name is from the property. I'm just adding a column name here with the underscore just to illustrate that that can be done. All right, Cassandra type. Now what's the type here? It's an array of string. So the way this works is there is a type called list. You see here, there is a type called list. But now the question is list of what? Okay, so for that, you have this new thing called type arguments. Okay, so this is a type of a list. Now, what is the type of each element in that list? Well, you can specify that to be name.text. Okay, so what you're doing is this is basically saying, hey, this is a Cassandra type of a list where each element is text. Okay, so this is how you declare a string, a list of string here, which is the cover IDs. We are going to do something similar for author, but we're not going to save the author ID. Okay, if you look over here, the schema is probably a little more elaborate. So author array is basically each element of the author array is this guy. All right, it has the author, it has the role, and then it has the as of type string. I don't know what this thing is. Let's take a look. Oh, this is author role. Hang on. Author. Let's see what author looks like. Author looks like this, right? So it has a type, and then the author and then the key. All I need is this part in this thing, all right? Just this part, because it's the author ID, right? I'm going to make this be an array of authors, and I'm just going to take this author ID and put it into the book. Okay, so this is just going to be an array of string again, but instead of cover ID here, it's going to be author IDs. And again, I'm going to, it's going to be author names, sorry. Because remember, we are denormalizing it. We don't want there to be author IDs, and then when we are looking up author for a book, we go to the author table. No, that's an extra hop, that's an extra query, which we don't want to do for these large scale systems like Cassandra. What we want to do is denormalize it. So I'm basically going to put the author name over here, right? So this is going to be author names, and this is a list of string again. Okay, so we have the list of covers, cover IDs, and a list of author names. And I'm actually thinking at this point if I should save the author ID as well, because when we load the book page and somebody clicks on an author name, we want to be able to navigate to the author page, right? So we need the author ID here as well. So what I'm going to do is save the author ID along with the author names, and I'm going to put that as a list. So it is going to basically correspond one-to-one to these names. Okay, so if there are two authors in a book who have written a book, there's going to be two author names and two author IDs, and then the 0th element of the author name corresponds to 0th element of the author ID, and so on, right? The other way to do it is to basically create another data structure, like another class, which I really don't want to do right now. This will suffice, and most of the books are going to have just one author anyway, so that should be fine. Okay, so I have the author ID in place as well. So the author name and the author ID are a part of the book. Next, what do I need? I think this should be it. I am pretty happy with these fields. Basic fields, I know, not a lot, but yeah, this will suffice. So I'm going to create getters and setters for all of these properties. Now we have another Cassandra entity. Okay, we have book. Next, we need book repository. This will do. All we need is a book repository which extends Cassandra repository. The entity that we need to fetch is a book, and the ID for the book is a string. So we have the book repository all ready to go. All we had to do was a copy. Okay, so we have the book entity, books by ID, and then we have the book repository. Now what's left to do is to get this book object. I'm going to construct the book object for each row in the works table. Okay, so I'm going to start by creating a new book. Book equals new book. And now I'm going to add these properties one by one in each line to this book. So we have got the JSON object over here, and we're going to parse things from this JSON object and put it into the book. Just like we did for the author object. You see here, when we constructed, we got this JSON object over here, and then we created an author instance, and then we set these properties on that author instance based on the JSON object's property, which is exactly what we're going to do over here. All right, first import book, and then set the properties on it. So what are the properties we have? Book dot set, we're going to set the ID. Okay, book dot set description, book dot set name, of course, we don't want to forget the name, book dot set cover IDs, author IDs and author names, and then finally the published date, right? These are the things we need to set. All right, now how do we do this? Well, the name is very simple. It's just the title, right? You go to, let me actually close all these things which are not necessary, right? I'm going to close these files which I have unnecessarily open. Okay, so this is a good example of a book record. So we're gonna keep this. So first thing we need is a title. So the name is coming from basically the title. Okay, so I'm going to do JSON object dot opt string. So basically I'm saying it's optional, not necessarily to be there, but For the title, it better be there. We're not editing out at least, all right? So I'm going to get the title and put it into the name. How about description? Well, I'm going to get the description.value and put it into the name. You see this? I'm going to get description. Description is going to be an object, and from there I need to get the value. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get JSON object dot opt JSON object, because it's not a string here, description. All right, this is going to get me the description object. Okay, and from the description object, I'm going to get the value, right? So opt string of the value. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if description object is not equal to null, I'm going to do book dot set description object dot opt string of value, which is this guy here. I'm checking if the description object exists. If it exists, then I'm going to get the value out of it. All right, so this takes care of the description. How about the published date? I'm just going to use created now, and I can change it to published date later, just so that I know that this exists for testing purposes. I'm going to get JSON object dot opt JSON object again to get this created, and then I'm again going to save this to a local variable called, I'm going to call this published object, and then from there I'm going to get the value. All right, if the published object is not null, I'm going to do a published object dot get string of the value, all right, which is this guy here, the string value, which is the date string. And then I'm going to do a local date dot parse local date string, and this is going to be assigned to book dot publish date. All right, that takes care of the publish date as well. Now what's next? So we've skipped the ID, but we've added the name, we've added the description by parsing the description object, we've added the published date by, of course, parsing the created object here just for testing purposes, but later I'm going to switch it to published by. And then now what's left is the cover, author ID, and author names. Covers. This is basically a simple array, right? This is simple. We can just parse it and get it. So I'm going to get the covers next. So covers is JSON object dot opt JSON array. Okay, just like you have opt JSON object to get optionally a JSON object, opt string to optionally get a string. Similarly, opt JSON array optionally gets a JSON array. It doesn't error out when there is no array. That's basically what the optionally means here. So what I need covers. Okay, and then I'm gonna put this into a new local variable. Covers JSON array. And now if covers JSON array is not equal to null, I'm going to have to do this check every time because any of those could be null thanks to opt. Okay, I'd rather do that than have it throw an exception. So I don't have much of a choice here. So what do I need? I need to create an array of string, right? Because covers cover ID is basically an array of strings. So sorry, a list of strings. I'm going to create a list of string cover IDs equals new array list of string, and for each one of these cover ID in the JSON array, so for int I equals 0, I less than method on this thing, which basically gets you the length of this the JSON array, right? How many ever elements are in this JSON array? I plus. What I need to do is get the covers JSON array. There is a get string method, which basically takes in that index and gives you the string. And what do I need to do? I need to do cover IDs.add of this thing. Okay, so I'm adding each cover. Adding each string that I get from this cover JSON array and adding it to the cover IDs. So by the end of this, the cover ID property is going to contain all the cover IDs, right? I'm plucking up each one of these one by one by pulling the JSON array and then plucking each element using the get string, pushing it into a string array list, and then I'm setting it over here. So what I'm going to do is book.set cover IDs. This has to go to the top here so that it's inside this if block, because this is defined over here and I want to set this, well, only if this JSON object exists. All right, so we've done covers. Now what's left to do is the author ID. How do I get the author IDs? So the author IDs are from the author object over here. You see this, there is an author object. I'm going to get the author object array, an object array, and then I'm going to parse each one of them. I need to parse each one by one. All right, let's see. Let's first get the author array. So this is a JSON array, right? It's not an object. See the square bracket, not curly brace. So I'm going to have to use this same approach here. So I'm going to get the authors JSON array. And again, I'm going to check if this is null. If it's not null, then I need to do the parsing, right? Authors JSON array, I'm going to get the author IDs as a new array list. And now it's not as simple as plucking up the string like with cover, right? I couldn't just take the individual values. What I need to do is get the JSON object, and each JSON object is going to be basically this author and type. Now, instead of looping through strings here, I'm going to loop through the objects. All right, so there's going to be author JSON array. I'm going to loop through the length of that thing, and I'm going to put this into, well, I cannot put this into author ID. So what I need to do is for each iteration, I need to get the author object. Okay, so I'm going to do authors JSON array dot get JSON object of the index I. So at every index, I'm going to get that JSON object. And then from there, I'm going to get the author object and then get the key from there. Okay, so I'm going to assume that that thing exists if there is an author instance here, because this one's opt. I'm not going to do opt over here and do a null check and all that every time, because I'm going to assume that if the authors exist, then each one of them is going to be of the structure and it's not going to be missing any of these properties. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is kind of assume that that's going to be the case, and then I'm going to do a dot get JSON object of author, and then from there I'm going to get JSON object of the, what is it, key. Okay, so I'm going to get that, and then from there I get this guy, right, which is this string. This is what I'm getting here. Now I'm going to replace, I'm going to basically remove the slash author slash from there. So go over here, dot, I'm sorry, this should be a string because we are getting a string there. I'm going to get string, and then from that string, I'm going to replace this part of the string slash author slash with an empty string. Okay, so this is going to give me the author ID, right? For each iteration, I'm going to get the author ID. So I'm going to put this into an author ID field, and then I'm going to do author IDs dot add of author ID. Okay, so what I'm doing here is basically parsing through to get this particular field. Okay, I'm basically doing, get JSON array of author, and then for each one get JSON object, each index, and then I'm going to do a get object of author, and from there get string of key, and I'm going to get the string, and from here I'm removing out the /author/ so that I get just this ID, and I'm putting that ID into the author's ID array, and then at the end I'm going to set book.set author IDs to be author IDs. Okay, why is it complaining? List of string is undefined for type book. What did I call it? I'm going to close this tab here. I called it author ID. Okay, let me actually rename this to author IDs because this makes more sense. And I'm going to generate getters and setters again. Okay, now author ID is done as well. Now we got to get the author names. How do we get the author names? We need to make a call to our author repository on Cassandra and say, hey, here is the author ID. Give me the corresponding author name so that I can save it into the book repository. Okay, so for each of these author IDs, I'm going to make a call to the author repository so that it's fetching the author name from there, or basically the author object from there. I'm going to look that up. So the way to do that is basically to get this author IDs. I'm actually going to put this in this object, it's in this if condition itself, because we want to do this only if there is the author JSON array exists. Okay, now out of here, I'm going to do author IDs. And then I'm going to get a stream so that I can kind of map it to whatever I get from the author repository. All right, I'm going to map the ID to, what do I need? I need to call the author repository. Oops. Dot, there should be a find by ID. Okay, here's a find by ID. And I'm going to get, from this, I'm going to get the author object. Okay, so find by ID is going to give me the author object because I'm using the author repository to say, hey, here's my ID, get me the author information. And now this call, this find by ID is going to go to the Cassandra database, fetch me the author information, and then give me the author object. Okay, now that I have the author object, I'm going to map it to just the name because all we care about is just the name. All right, so I'm going to get an optional here. So I'm going to have an optional author, and over here, what I'm going to do is if not, I'm going to do optional author dot is present. It will let me know if this actually exists or not. Okay, so I'm going to do if not optional author dot is present. I'm going to I'll have to return something. I'm going to return unknown author. Okay, so this is the case where the author ID exists in the author ID array, but I'm not able to find the author from calling Cassandra. Okay, so I'm making an assumption here because we have two data dumps. We have the author dump and we have the works dump. I am linking the author ID from the work dump to an individual row in the author dump. So there is a chance that there is some author ID referenced in the work dump which is not there in the author dump, right? The author might be missing in the author dump. So in that case, we want to show something there. So I'm just going to call it unknown author, which is what I'm doing over here, right? For some reason, the author ID in the work dump doesn't have a corresponding record in the author dump. I'm just going to call it unknown author, and it's going to show up on the UI as unknown author, which is all I care about, right? Just going to call it unknown author. If not, if there does exist an author, I'm going to have to get the author name. All right. So I'm going to do a return optional author dot get. I know that this exists. So now I can do a dot get name. So I'm going to return a name. So what this is doing is it's mapping each author ID to either unknown author, if it cannot find it, or the name of the author that we fished from Cassandra when we get this, right? So now I'm going to have to do a collect. Collect of, I'm going to use collectors dot to list, right? So I'm going to make a list out of the string, and this is going to be the author names, all right? So I'm going to assign it to author names is going to be this, and now I'm going to do book.set author names as author names. Okay, I've basically done a map of author IDs to author names that I'm fetching from Cassandra, right? It's calling Cassandra when I'm doing a find by ID, getting an author object, an optional author object, obviously, because the repository class, when you do a find by ID, there is a chance that that record doesn't exist, right? So find by ID returns optional of the entity that you're looking at. You see here, it says optional of author. So what I'm doing is, for each one of those optional authors, I'm mapping it to a string, okay? That's either going to be a known author or the name of the author. I'm collecting it and creating an author names list of string, and then I'm setting it to author names, book.author names. All right. So this leaves the ID here. The ID should be fairly simple now that we know how this works. The ID is basically the key, but with /works/removed. Okay, should be simple. What I'm going to do is do a JSON object dot get optional string of. I don't know if it's optional. I think I can basically assume that this thing exists. Okay, I can assume that get string of key exists, and then replace, not repeat, replace of the /works/ with an empty string. All right, so this is going to give the ID, and I'm going to set this over here, right? So this is the ID, and I'm going to replicate the try catch that we had over here, so that we are able to handle the error that the JSON object thing throws. All right, I'm gonna have a catch any exception. Don't want to deal with it. I want to move on, right? When there is an exception, I want to not have it break anything. If there is one row that is not formatted correctly or it fails, I don't want the whole upload to fail. I want it to just exclude that row and move on, which is what I'm doing over here. All right, so this is my init works method. Let me format this properly. And now we have the code to parse every book that is in existence and save it to Cassandra. Again, as with before, I am going to basically take a few and then push it, not have it push everything because that would take forever. And then we can readjust later, right? So here are all the lines, right? So we are reading from the file. So here is all the lines. I'm going to do a dot lines dot limit of maybe 50 records, and then we're going to run this and see how it works. All right, so I'm going to run this thing. A couple of things to remember before we run this. I don't want to run the author thing again. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out. We've already initialized the authors, so we don't want to do that again. That's done. The second thing is I'm going to make sure that it doesn't blow up the database when I run it again. Okay, so the way to do that is this one. Schema action, create if not exist. I want to make sure that it creates only if it doesn't exist, but it doesn't blow away the whole database and the whole schema, because we've uploaded all the authors. Right? We want that to stay. Okay, so that's the reason why I have create if not exist here, which is fine. If you have like drop, create, or whatever, then make sure that you've changed this before you run it again, because if you run it with that property in the schema action, all your previous uploads are gone. Okay, I certainly don't want to do that because I've uploaded every author that is into the system. So now that I have this set up, I'm going to try running this, right? I'm going to run and install, upload 50 books to the database. Let's see how this works. What is this complaining about? Is never used locally. Yeah, that's fine. I can live with it for now. Okay, there seems to be an error. So let's take a look at what the error is. Text could not be parsed. Okay, so there is a date error. Date formatting error. Okay, so what's the formatting of this date? It's year, month, date, probably. And then there is a T, and then the hours, minutes, seconds, and then the milliseconds. Okay, so we're gonna have to fix the formatting here. All right, let's do that. The way to make the formatting work is by using a formatter. Okay, you have to specify a formatter and say, hey, use this particular format. Because right now what's happening is you're just assuming the default format, right? I'm not sure what the default format is, but it's definitely not the T and all that weird stuff, okay? So we're gonna have to create a formatter and then pass it to the local date parse so that it parses it with that formatting, okay? So let's do that now. I'm gonna put this over here at the very top because I'm guessing all the formats are the same. So I'm gonna use datetime formatter. Datetime formatter dot off pattern. And then let's see what the pattern is here. Where did he go? Where did he go? Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's 4 digits for the year. Okay, so I'm gonna have 4 digits for the year, and then 2 digits for the month, and then 2 digits for the date. Okay, and then there is a T here, which is kind of odd, but well, I can just put, I think I can just put this this thing here, which basically says ignore this thing. The T in quotes, single quotes, basically means this thing is 1. I'm going to zoom it up a little bit because formatting needs clear view. So basically this T in single quotes means just leave it as is. Okay, and then we have hour, minutes, seconds, dot milliseconds. Okay, so I'm gonna put hour colon minutes colon seconds dot milliseconds is going to be the capital S. Let's see how many digits we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this is going to be the formatter, and I'm going to assign this to a date format. All right, now I need to pass this date format to everywhere I'm parsing the date. Right? It's just this one place. So I'm going to pass the formatter here. Okay, let's run this one more time. And let's see if we have better luck now. Seems to be doing something. Seems to have started. I don't know what it did. I should have added some kind of a messaging there. I didn't add anything. So let's take a look at what this has done, shall we? I'm gonna go to my database here, SQL console, CQL console, not SQL console. Use main, and then select star from. Do we have the table here? Book by ID. All right, book by ID. Okay, there's nothing here, which is not what I expected. So let's see what's going on. It should have parsed through the first 50 lines, and I'm an idiot. I have the book instance ready, and I haven't asked the repository to save it. This is stupid. So you see here I have the book information. You're probably watching this video going, when is this guy saving this instance? Completely skipped my mind. Okay, so I have created this book instance here. What I need to do is call the repository and save it, just like I did for the author. Okay, so you see here for the author, I did author repository, .save. That would be a good thing to do, don't you think? I'm going to copy this thing here and then paste it to the book repository, the book processing as well, and I'm going to save it here, right? So now that I have this thing saved, for each book, I'm going to have to persist it. Saving book.getName, and then I'm going to do the book repository.save of book. Book repository cannot be resolved. Well, we can create a local variable and import it and auto wire it, right? This is what I'm going to do. Get this guy here and auto wire book repository. Okay. Import this, please. And then over here, I am calling book repository.save of book. Now, hopefully, we will see book names fly by in the console because I'm printing it out. Oh, there you go. See, here are all the books that are being saved. It'll be interesting to see if it is done the formatting properly because haven't tested this. Was that 50 books? That felt like a little less than 50 books. No, seems like it. All right, so I'm gonna go here and run this one more time. Looks like we've got book information. Okay, so we have, what are the fields here? What are the fields we've got here? Okay, we've got the ID, author name, book description. I'm guessing the book description is gonna be empty for a lot of things. Yeah, we've got something. We should be good to go. Since the published date, the first published date doesn't exist for a lot of those records, I'm just going to use created date as the published date. I know it's not accurate, but this is a hobby project, so what do you do? I just want some date to be there so that we can display it. When we productionize it, maybe we can switch it to published date, but right now we have something, okay? We have something. We have the books, and let's see if we have we have the author names as well, all right? So you see here, these are the author names. I'm getting an array of authors. This one has an extra slash, which is kind of weird. Maybe it's in the name. Oh, well, you can't do anything with small data formatting errors when a data of this scale. It is what it is. So looks like we've got the author names, we've got the author IDs, we've got the cover IDs over here, and we've got the date saved, the title, the description. So everything seems to be going good. So now that we have the book information here, let us switch to actually creating a web application which displays this book information, okay? I'm not gonna upload all the books right now because it's gonna take a lot of time. So 50 books is enough. Maybe I'll increase the number later. But now I'm gonna switch to the web application. So what we've been looking at is a data loader, right? We got the data from the dump and posted it to Cassandra. Now we're gonna create a Spring MVC application, a Spring Boot application, which is going to have a URL where I'm going to say books/book ID, and it is going to fetch this book information and display it in a nice HTML page using Thymeleaf, and then it's going to show you the cover, the title, the description, all that good stuff. Okay, whatever data we have over here, right? So let's check that out in the next video.